While sorting laundry, I pulled out a pair of men's underwear 2 sizes larger than mine. She said, "No idea how those got there." When I showed her the monogrammed initials, when I paused the video at the bedroom frame, I did not expect anything unusual from that night. It was late, quiet, and ordinary in the way shared routines usually are when 2 people have lived together long enough to stop narrating their movements. The apartment was half-packed because we were preparing to move closer to my new job, and the place looked wrong in that temporary, unsettled way where nothing belongs anywhere. Cardboard boxes lined the hallway. Labels were written quickly, some crossed out, some inaccurate. It felt like a pause between chapters rather than a beginning or an ending. Lauren had gone to bed early, claiming a headache and an early meeting the next morning. That was not unusual either. Her schedule had become unpredictable in recent months, but I had accepted that as part of adulthood and career pressure. I stayed up to finish small tasks so the weekend would be easier. Laundry was one of them. I gathered clothes from the bedroom, the bathroom, and the spare room where we stored overflow items. Most of it was mine because I had let things pile up during a stretch of long shifts. I remember thinking that I should have done this earlier, that I was already tired, and that I would regret staying up. Nothing about the moment suggested that it would matter. I carried the basket into the living room because that was where we had space to sort. The washer and dryer were in the building basement, shared by everyone, which made it easier to separate loads upstairs. I started with socks, folding them without much thought. Shirts followed. Jeans. Gym clothes. The rhythm was automatic. Then I picked up something that stopped the rhythm entirely. It was a pair of men's underwear. Dark fabric. A brand I did not wear. The waistband was wider than mine, the cut different, the size clearly larger. I held it up without really understanding what I was seeing, as if the object might explain itself if I looked long enough. My first thought was not suspicion. It was confusion. I checked the basket again, then the pile, then the surrounding clothes, as though context would fix the problem. Nothing changed. The underwear was still there. It was not mine. I knew that with certainty. I tried to reason through it calmly. Shared laundry machines sometimes mixed items. It had happened before with socks. Occasionally someone's shirt or towel would appear, and we would leave it folded on top of the machines downstairs. That explanation would have worked if this item had come from the dryer. It had not. This was clean, dry, and mixed in with clothes I had brought from our bedroom. That detail bothered me more than the size. I stood there for a long moment, holding the fabric, listening to the refrigerator hum and the faint sound of traffic outside. The apartment felt suddenly too quiet, like it was waiting for me to notice something else. I walked into the bedroom and turned on the light. Lauren was asleep on her side, facing the wall. Her breathing was steady. Nothing about her posture suggested anxiety or restlessness. The room looked normal. Bed made earlier that evening. Her clothes folded on the chair. No obvious signs of disruption. I considered waking her up immediately, but I stopped myself. I wanted to understand before accusing, even silently. I placed the underwear on the dresser instead of throwing it away, partly because discarding it felt like destroying evidence, and partly because I could not bring myself to decide what it meant yet. I went back to the living room and finished sorting the rest of the clothes, though my hands moved slower now. Every item seemed suspect in a way it never had before. When I finished, I carried the basket downstairs, ran the machines, and returned to the apartment with a tight feeling in my chest that I could not explain as fear or anger. It was closer to disorientation. When I came back up, Lauren was awake, sitting up in bed with her phone in her hand. She asked why I was still up. I told her I had been doing laundry. That was true, but incomplete. I picked up the underwear from the dresser and held it out, keeping my voice neutral. I asked her if she knew where it came from. She looked at it briefly, then back at me, then at it again. Her reaction was subtle but immediate. Not shock, not recognition, but a kind of pause that lasted half a second too long. She said she had no idea how it got there. She suggested the shared machines downstairs. She shrugged in a way that seemed rehearsed, as if she had practiced indifference before. Her explanation did not address the fact that the underwear had been in our bedroom, mixed with our clothes. When I pointed that out, she adjusted the story slightly. Maybe it got stuck to something. Maybe it came from a bag she had used at the gym. Maybe it was a mistake from before we moved in. The possibilities stacked up quickly, none of them examined. What struck me was not what she said, but how fast she wanted the conversation to end. She reached for the item as if to toss it into the trash, smiling faintly, already moving on. I stopped her without touching her, just by holding it closer to myself. I told her I would take care of it later. She watched me for a moment, then lay back down, turning away again. Her phone screen lit up briefly before she locked it. I stood there longer than necessary, trying to decide whether I was being paranoid or observant. That night, I did not sleep well. My thoughts kept circling the same questions without landing anywhere. The underwear alone did not prove anything. It was an object without context, and context could be invented or erased depending on how much imagination I applied. What kept me awake was not suspicion, but inconsistency. The explanations did not align with the physical facts, and Lauren had not tried to align them. Over the next few days, small things began to feel heavier. Lauren changed the subject when I mentioned the move. She volunteered to handle more errands than usual. She asked about my work schedule with a specificity that felt new, confirming dates and times she had never seemed to care about before. I noticed that she had started washing certain loads of laundry herself, separately, without mentioning it. I did not confront her again. Instead, I paid attention. I checked the basket before each wash. I noted when she left and when she returned. I listened more than I spoke. Nothing obvious happened, but the absence of obviousness became its own signal. The apartment no longer felt shared. It felt managed. One evening, while folding clothes again, I examined the underwear more closely. I had kept it in a drawer I rarely used, not because I knew what I would do with it, but because throwing it away felt premature. That was when I noticed the stitching inside the waistband. The initials were small, almost hidden, sewn neatly in a way that suggested intention rather than decoration. I stared at them longer than necessary, letting the realization settle slowly instead of crashing. The item had not wandered into our home by accident. Someone had brought it deliberately, worn it deliberately, and left it behind. I closed the drawer and walked into the living room, where Lauren was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. I did not say anything yet. I wanted the story to reveal itself rather than forcing it open. By the end of that week, the apartment felt like a place I was passing through rather than living in. I was still there, still engaged, still planning a future on paper, but something fundamental had shifted. The trust had not shattered. It had loosened, like a structure with one missing bolt, still standing but no longer solid. I did not know yet how far things went or how long they had been happening. All I knew was that something foreign had entered our life quietly, and that Lauren had chosen to pretend it did not exist. That was enough to change how I looked at everything that followed. The initials stayed with me longer than the fabric itself. I did not carry the underwear around or bring it up again right away. I did something quieter and more unsettling. I let the knowledge sit between us while life continued on the surface as if nothing had changed. Lauren moved through the apartment with a careful efficiency that I had not noticed before. She wiped counters that were already clean. She reorganized shelves we were planning to empty anyway. She volunteered to handle grocery runs and dry cleaning without prompting. It felt less like generosity and more like management, as if she was smoothing a surface she knew had cracks underneath. I waited for a moment that felt natural, not dramatic. It came 3 days later, on a Tuesday evening that looked exactly like every other weekday evening we had shared. Dinner was leftovers. The television was on, but neither of us was paying attention. The apartment felt smaller than usual. I took the underwear from the drawer and placed it on the coffee table, folded carefully. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I simply pointed out the initials sewn inside and asked her if that detail helped her memory. Her reaction was immediate and unmistakable. She did not look at the initials. She looked at me. Her posture stiffened, and the casual rhythm she had been maintaining broke completely. For a second, she did not respond at all. Then she laughed, but the sound came out thin and ended too quickly. She said she still had no idea. She said maybe it was from before we lived together. She said maybe it belonged to someone who had stayed over years ago and somehow resurfaced. None of those explanations matched the timing or the condition of the item. The underwear was recently washed. The stitching was clean. The elastic had not degraded. This was not something that had been forgotten in a corner and rediscovered by chance. I told her that I was not interested in guessing games. I told her that the initials meant someone had enough presence in our home to leave personal belongings behind without concern. I told her that the shared laundry explanation no longer applied. She became defensive then, not loudly, but sharply. She asked why I was interrogating her. She said I was being unreasonable. She said it was just underwear and that I was turning nothing into something. Her voice stayed controlled, but her hands fidgeted, twisting the edge of a pillow until the fabric wrinkled. What struck me was not the denial, but the shift in tone. The conversation had crossed from inconvenience to threat. I told her I needed honesty, not reassurance. I told her that if there was a simple explanation, this was the moment to give it. I did not move closer. I did not touch her. I stayed where I was, leaving space for the truth to appear. She stood up instead. Lauren paced the living room, listing possibilities faster than I could process them. A coworker who borrowed gym clothes. A friend who changed here once. A mix-up from a donation bag that had never actually existed. Each explanation contradicted the last. Each one required more coincidence than the one before it. I asked her to stop. When she did, the silence that followed was heavier than any argument. She stared at the floor, then at the wall, then finally at the underwear again. Her face settled into something more neutral, less reactive. She said she still did not know how it got there. I realized then that I was not dealing with confusion. I was dealing with refusal. I told her we would talk later and picked up the underwear, returning it to the drawer. Ending the conversation felt wrong, but continuing it felt useless. I needed information, not resistance. Over the next week, I stopped assuming good faith and started observing patterns. Lauren's schedule became clearer once I stopped taking it at face value. She claimed late meetings that did not align with her company's hours. She mentioned deadlines that did not appear on her calendar. She left the apartment dressed differently than before, more carefully styled, even when she said she was running simple errands. I noticed she had started parking farther from the building instead of using the usual spot. When I asked why, she said it was easier. It was not. One evening, while bringing in groceries, I ran into our neighbor from the unit across the hall, a man who kept mostly to himself but had lived there longer than we had. He nodded toward our door and asked casually whether we had guests often. The question was unremarkable on the surface. The timing was not. I asked what he meant. He shrugged and said he had seen someone else coming and going recently. A man, tall, broader build than me. He said he assumed it was family visiting for the move. I thanked him and carried the groceries inside, my hands steady, my thoughts anything but. The description matched the underwear. Larger size, different presence, someone who did not belong. That night, after Lauren fell asleep, I opened her shared digital calendar on the tablet we both used. It was synced to our devices, something we had set up years earlier for convenience. At first glance, everything looked normal. Work blocks, appointments, reminders. Then I noticed gaps. Entire afternoons marked as free during weeks she had claimed to be overloaded. Deleted entries that left faint traces of rescheduling. Repeating patterns that aligned precisely with my overnight shifts and extended workdays. This was not spontaneous. It was coordinated. I did not confront her immediately. Instead, I copied the information for myself and closed the app. The next morning, Lauren was unusually attentive, asking if I needed anything, offering to make coffee, checking whether I would be late. The concern felt performative, like someone following a script to maintain normalcy. A name surfaced 2 days later, quietly and accidentally. Lauren mentioned a former coworker while talking about office politics, someone she said had transferred months ago. She said the name without emphasis, as if it meant nothing. Thomas Hale. I did not react. I filed it away. That evening, while she was in the shower, I searched the name. It did not take long. The man fit the description perfectly. Same build, same city, same general professional circle. Social media showed recent activity, recent photos, recent check-ins at places near our apartment. There was no direct evidence connecting him to Lauren online. That absence felt intentional rather than reassuring. I waited until she came out of the bathroom and sat down across from her, keeping my tone level. I asked her if she still talked to Thomas Hale. Her response was delayed just enough to matter. She said no, not really. She said they were not close. She said she had not seen him in a long time. I told her our neighbor had seen another man coming into the apartment. I told her the initials did not belong to me. I told her her calendar no longer matched her explanations. She did not deny the sightings. She did not deny the initials. She only repeated that I was misinterpreting things. That was when I understood the scope of what I was facing. This was not a single mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a sustained effort to control what I saw, what I knew, and what I questioned. I told her I needed space to think. I left the apartment and spent the night elsewhere, not because I wanted distance, but because I needed clarity without interference. By the time I returned the next day, I was no longer searching for confirmation. I was preparing for confrontation. What I did not know yet was how much of the truth had already been captured without either of us realizing it. I came back to the apartment the next evening with a different mindset than the one I had left with. I was no longer trying to protect the idea of us. I was trying to understand the full shape of what had already happened. That distinction mattered, because it changed how I looked at familiar objects and routines. The apartment no longer felt neutral. It felt like a place that had been used without my knowledge. Lauren acted relieved when she saw me. She asked if I was feeling better. She said she hated tension. She said we should not let small misunderstandings spiral into something larger. Her words were smooth, practiced, and arranged to lead me back toward normalcy. I did not follow. I told her I needed to finish packing some things in the spare room. That was true, but incomplete. The spare room had become a place where items accumulated without much attention, including electronics we no longer use daily. One of those items was the smart home hub connected to the camera system we had installed 2 years earlier. The cameras were not hidden. They were not meant to spy on anyone. We installed them after a package theft in the building, mostly to cover the hallway and the front door. One of the cameras had a partial view down the hall, and into the bedroom doorway at a specific angle. We had stopped checking the footage regularly because nothing ever happened. Until now. Lauren knew about the cameras. She had always known. We had reviewed footage together in the past, laughed about how uninteresting it was, and eventually forgot about it. That familiarity was important because it explained why she did not treat them as a threat. I sat on the floor with the hub connected to the television and started scrolling through archived footage from the past few months. I did not search randomly. I focused on dates that matched the gaps in her calendar and my work schedule. Late nights, early afternoons, times when I was not home and she had claimed to be elsewhere. At first, the footage looked exactly as expected. Empty hallways. Lauren leaving alone. Lauren returning alone. Nothing dramatic. The normal speed playback created a sense of reassurance that almost pulled me back into doubt. Then I slowed it down. The change was immediate. Small details emerged that had been invisible at full speed. A door opening and closing more than once. Shadows moving differently. The sound of footsteps overlapping when there should have been only one set. I paused the footage repeatedly, scanning frame by frame, my attention narrowing with each discovery. The hallway camera did not show faces clearly unless someone looked directly toward it. That limitation had always made it feel safe, uninformative. The bedroom camera angle was different. It did not show the room itself. It showed the doorway and, through an accidental alignment of mirrors, a narrow reflection of the space inside. The mirror had been positioned that way for years without meaning anything. Now it mattered more than anything else in the room. I paused the footage on a date from 3 weeks earlier, an afternoon when Lauren had said she was working late and I had taken an overnight shift. The timestamp matched the calendar gap. The hallway showed Lauren entering the apartment alone. That part aligned with her story. 8 minutes later, the front door opened again. I paused the video. The man who entered was taller than me, broader in the shoulders, and moved through the space with familiarity. He did not hesitate. He did not look around. He walked straight down the hall and into the bedroom. I did not recognize his face clearly from that angle, but I recognized the confidence. This was not someone sneaking. This was someone returning. I advanced the footage slowly, frame by frame, until the mirror reflection came into view. The angle caught only part of the room, but it was enough. The man stepped into the reflected area briefly while adjusting his shirt. He was wearing the same underwear. I knew it instantly, not because of a logo or a clear image, but because of the cut and the waistband. It matched the fabric I had held in my hands. The same color, the same width, the same deliberate presence. I sat there longer than necessary, letting the certainty settle in rather than explode. There was no ambiguity left to resolve. The video did not require interpretation. It showed exactly what had been happening in our apartment while I was gone. What struck me next was something more unsettling than the affair itself. Lauren never looked toward the camera. She moved through the apartment in ways that avoided its field of view, guiding him without acknowledging it. She closed doors at specific angles. She stood just outside the frame when she spoke. The behavior was subtle, but consistent. She had not forgotten about the cameras. She had accounted for them. That realization reframed everything. This was not a series of impulsive choices. This was a pattern that had been adjusted and refined over time. The underwear left behind was not carelessness. It was a mistake that had slipped through a system designed to prevent exactly that kind of discovery. I backed up the footage and continued watching. There were more dates, more entries, different clothes, different times. Always the same man. Always the same controlled movement through the apartment. Always the same avoidance of direct exposure. I stopped when my hands started shaking, not from anger, but from the strain of holding everything together while absorbing the full scope of what I was seeing. Lauren was in the kitchen when I stood up, talking on the phone in a low voice. She looked up when she saw me, her expression neutral, almost pleasant. She ended the call quickly and asked if I wanted dinner. I told her we needed to talk now. She followed me into the living room without protest, which told me she already sensed the shift. I did not raise my voice. I did not gesture dramatically. I turned the television toward her and brought up the paused frame. I did not narrate it. I did not accuse. I simply let the image exist between us. The moment she saw the reflection, her face changed in a way that no denial could mask. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her shoulders dropped, not in defeat, but in calculation, as if she was deciding which version of the truth would do the least damage. I told her I had watched the footage. I told her I knew how long it had been happening. I told her I recognized the underwear. She did not cry. She did not yell. She sat down slowly and asked how much I knew. I told her enough. She admitted to the relationship without embellishment. She said it had started months ago. She said Thomas knew about me. She said it was not supposed to matter. She said the engagement was convenient, stable, and beneficial while the other relationship fulfilled something different. I asked her why she continued planning the wedding. She said it made sense at the time. I asked her why she lied when confronted directly. She said she thought she could manage it. That word stayed with me. Manage. As if the situation were a process rather than a betrayal. I told her I was leaving the apartment that night. I told her the wedding would not happen. I told her I would handle the practical matters without drama. She tried to negotiate then, not emotionally, but strategically. She asked what I intended to do with the footage. She asked who I would tell. She asked how we could minimize damage. I told her I was no longer responsible for protecting her version of events. I packed a bag and took the drawer with the underwear with me, not out of spite, but because it represented the point where everything unraveled. I left the apartment without slamming doors or making declarations. As I walked out, I understood something clearly for the first time since this began. The worst part was not that she had brought someone else into our life. It was that she had done so with planning, patience, and a belief that I would never look closely enough to notice. That belief was about to be tested. I did not rush the aftermath. That was a decision, not hesitation. I understood that anything done quickly would look emotional, and anything emotional would give Lauren room to reshape the narrative. I stayed elsewhere for a few days, long enough for distance to turn clarity into resolve. During that time, I did not argue with her, explain myself, or respond to her messages beyond acknowledging logistics. Every attempt she made to reopen the conversation followed the same pattern. She framed the situation as complex, misunderstood, or salvageable. None of those words applied anymore. The first concrete step I took was administrative. I contacted the venue and canceled the reservation. The contract allowed it with penalties, which I paid without discussion. I canceled the caterer, the photographer, and the florist in the same afternoon. I did not do it to punish her. I did it to prevent her from claiming that the wedding was still a possibility. When I was finished, there was no future event left to argue about. Next, I separated finances. Our accounts were partially joint because we had been preparing to merge things after the wedding. I closed what I could, froze what required signatures, and documented everything. This was not revenge. It was containment. I did not want to discover later that trust had been misplaced in more than one area. Lauren reacted quickly once she realized that the structure around her was disappearing. She called repeatedly, alternating between apology and irritation. When that failed, she shifted to reassurance, then to anger, then back to reason. Each approach assumed that the problem was something we could negotiate. I did not engage. I informed both families with the same message, sent separately, factual, and brief. I explained that the wedding was canceled due to sustained dishonesty and that I had evidence supporting my decision. I did not attach the evidence. I did not need to. The statement alone was enough to change the tone of every conversation that followed. Lauren attempted to control the fallout by reaching out first to mutual friends, offering partial explanations and carefully framed regrets. That strategy collapsed when she realized that I was not contradicting her publicly. Silence gave her story no resistance to push against, which made its inconsistencies stand out on their own. Thomas disappeared almost immediately. When Lauren tried to reach him after I left, he stopped responding. She told me this during one of her calls, not as a confession, but as an accusation, as if his absence was another problem I was responsible for creating. I did not respond. I already understood his role. He had been comfortable as long as the arrangement remained invisible. Exposure changed the equation, and he chose distance over accountability. A week later, Lauren asked if we could meet to talk through what she called closure. I agreed, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I wanted the final exchange to be direct and contained rather than drawn out through messages. We met in a neutral place during the afternoon. She looked different, not disheveled or dramatic, just less controlled. The confidence she had relied on was gone, replaced by something reactive. She asked again what I intended to do with the footage. I told her I had already done what mattered. The wedding was canceled. The truth was known where it needed to be known. I was not interested in public spectacle. She asked if I planned to ruin her career. I told her that I had not contacted her workplace and had no intention of doing so. I also told her that I would not lie if asked directly. That distinction unsettled her more than any threat could have. She asked why I was being so calm. I told her that calm was not forgiveness. It was simply the absence of uncertainty. After that meeting, contact dwindled. There were no dramatic scenes, no drawn-out negotiations. Lauren moved out of the apartment on her own schedule. I retrieved the rest of my belongings when she was not there. The space felt different without her, not emptier, but neutral again, as if it had been reset. Over the following months, consequences emerged naturally, without orchestration. Lauren's version of events shifted depending on the audience. In some circles, she admitted to a mistake. In others, she framed the relationship as already broken. The lack of a consistent explanation made people cautious. Invitations stopped. Trust thinned. These were not punishments I delivered. They were outcomes of exposure. Thomas resurfaced briefly in conversation when someone mentioned he had transferred again, this time to another city. There was no dramatic fallout attached to his name, just quiet distance. Whatever arrangement he had relied on no longer existed. As for me, the change was less visible but more fundamental. I moved into a smaller place on my own, closer to work, without shared calendars or negotiated schedules. The silence felt earned rather than lonely. I rebuilt routines deliberately, aware now of how easily assumptions could replace awareness if left unchecked. Occasionally, I thought about the first moment this started, standing in the living room with a piece of fabric in my hand, unsure whether it mattered. That memory stayed with me, not as regret, but as instruction. The truth did not arrive all at once. It revealed itself through details that refused to align with comforting explanations. What ended the relationship was not the affair alone, but the sustained belief that I would never look closely enough to see it. That belief turned out to be the most expensive mistake of all.